Africa. Of the seven continents, Africa is the second largest. Africa is two-thirds as big as Asia. Asia and Europe are both near neighbors of Africa. At one place, only 9 miles of water in the Strait of Gibraltar separate Africa and Europe. Africa and Asia are joined by the narrow Isthmus of Suez. It does not have any big peninsulas. It does not have any big bays. Its coastline is almost smooth. In this way, it is very different from Europe and Asia. Many people think of it as being farther south on the earth than it is. Actually, it straddles the equator. Much of it, therefore, has summer the year round. Near the equator, in the dark, tangled forests, rain falls almost every day. Farther north and farther south, in the region of vast sandy deserts, it almost never rains. Africa used to be called the Dark Continent. It got this name because very little was known about most of it. Great parts of Africa had never been explored by the people of other continents. For one thing, traveling into it was hard. Traveling into it by land meant, in some places, chopping a way through jungle. In other places, it meant crossing a desert. Ocean boats cannot go far inland on deep bays. Africa does have several large rivers, but boats cannot travel very far up most of them. Much of Africa is a great plateau high above the sea. The rivers rise in the equator highlands. As they come to the edge of the plateau, they fall over it in waterfalls or steep rapids. Boats cannot climb up the falls and rapids. The coastlands that could be reached easily were, as a rule, unpleasant places to live in. Some were swampy, some were bare rock and sand. In some places, dense forest grew down to the edge of the sea. Almost everywhere, heat made these coastlands uncomfortable. The Sahara, one of Africa's two great deserts, crosses the northern half of the continent. South of the Sahara, the natives are dark people. When white people first began to explore south of Sahara, most of the natives were unfriendly. They soon became more so, for the outsiders began capturing them and selling them as slaves in other parts of the world. Another reason the middle of Africa was not explored sooner is that traders could get ivory and gold and slaves from the coast. They did not know about the other riches in this big continent. But by 1870, a few explorers had gone deep into Africa and had brought out word of some of its riches. At the same time, some of the countries of Europe were becoming so crowded that they wanted new land to spread into. There began a scramble among the nations of Europe to set up colonies in Africa. The natives of Africa were not strong enough to keep their land for themselves. Soon, most of Africa was carved into colonies. Africa is sometimes called the continent of colonies. Some of the colonies have changed hands. Some are now independent nations. But there are still many parts of Africa that do not rule themselves. Even after colonies were set up, few people from other lands went to them. Exploring the continent could not make the climate more attractive to Europeans. In zoos, we see many African animals lions and elephants, gorillas and giraffes. Some come from the forests. Others live in the great grasslands that border the forests. Arab nomads pitch their tents in the Sahara among these animals. Big game hunters have killed many of Africa's wild animals. There are not enough elephants left to furnish a great deal of ivory. Gold cannot be washed out of the streams so easily as it was once. But in place of gold and ivory, Africa now sells diamonds and copper and tin to the rest of the world. It sells uranium, manganese, chromium, and cobalt. From Africa come quantities of cotton and wool for clothes, tobacco for cigarettes, and palm oil for soaps. The farmers also raise big crops of olives and dates, coffee and cocoa, sugarcane and peanuts, wheat, corn, and rubber. Besides all these, there is enough iron to take care of the needs of the continent for generations to come. And there is enough water power in the mighty rivers to run thousands of big factories. When the people of Europe were still living in caves, the people of Africa along the river Nile were highly civilized. They built magnificent monuments. They had an elaborate irrigation system for bringing water to dry lands. They had a written language. These people were the Egyptians, but their civilization did not spread to the rest of Africa. Instead, it spread around the Mediterranean Sea to lands in Asia and Europe. Travel in many parts of Africa is not yet easy. Except in the countries along the Mediterranean Sea and in the Union of South Africa, there are not many roads for automobiles. There are not many railroads either. Roads and railroads are needed to link the rich mines and croplands in the interior with the ports on the coast and with the factories in the cities. Some of the railroads that have been built are short. They run around waterfalls. Passengers and cargo come up to the fall by boat. Then they travel around the falls by train. They take to boats again for the rest of their journey. Aeroplanes are now a big help in traveling in Africa. They can fly over deserts, forests, and waterfalls. They can reach places that are hard to reach in other ways. Thank you for listening. Now some word power. Of the seven continents, Africa is the second largest. Africa is two-thirds as big as Asia. Asia and Europe are both near neighbors of Africa. At one place, only 9 miles of water in the Strait of Gibraltar separate Africa and Europe. Strait. Strait means a narrow passage of water connecting two seas or other two large areas of water. Africa and Asia are joined by the narrow Isthmus of Suez. Isthmus. Isthmus means a narrow strip of land with sea on either side. It does not have any big peninsulas. It does not have any big bays. Its coastline is almost smooth. In this way, it is very different from Europe and Asia. Many people think of it as being farthest south on the earth than it is. Actually, it straddles the equator. It straddles the equator means it exists on each side of it or goes across it. Thank you very much.